where we go deep on the security, compliance, and privacy implications of using AI. I'm your host, Walter Haydock, the founder of StackAware. Today I'm joined by Danny Manimbo, who's the managing principal at Schellman. He leads the firm's AI governance and ISO assurance practice, overseeing strategy, delivery, and quality assurance across AI, ISO, and broader attestation work. With 15 plus years in information security, data privacy, AI governance, and compliance, he helps organizations operationalize controls and stay ahead of evolving regulatory and risk landscapes for emerging technologies. Danny, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Walter.
So, how did you find yourself in the world of AI auditing and assurance?
Yeah, great question. And I'll just start off that, really appreciative of our relationship over the years and you being both a client and a partner and really respect your approach to content and messaging and, the amount of awareness that you've spread for AI hygiene, AI governance, et cetera. You really take that teacher educator approach, which I think the market has really needed. Excited for springtime in New England when we can start doing some of the Bob Ross stuff outside again. I thought that was pretty fun. Um,
Thanks.
yeah, no, 100%. You keep it fun, you keep it light, and I've learned a lot from you, so it's been very appreciative and excited to be here. But as far as a little bit about me, yeah, as you mentioned, managing principal at Schellman. I'm a dad to 7-year-old twins. They keep me very busy. As far as kind of how we got into AI governance at Schellman, of course, our firm's been around almost 25 years at this point. Cybersecurity and data privacy focused primarily. And so when we heard about in 2023 that there was an ISO standard coming for AI, I mean, we perked up, as an organization. I remember, several conversations I had with Avni, our CEO, and in terms of us, really wanting to leap on this. And that's just what we did. It complemented what we were doing in the ISO front, of course, and heavy footprint in 27001 at Schellman at the time with, information security standard, 27701 with privacy that really, came on with GDPR in 2018, 2019. So it just fit into what we were doing quite well and really how we got connected, because I know you were you were our second client, one of the first companies out there in the world to go through the 42001 certification process. And it was really where our clients were headed. That's, just about all of them are quote unquote AI companies utilizing AI. And part of our mission at Schellman is really to ensure that our services are evolving with, kind of where our clients are headed technology use wise and, what they'll have concerns about.
Understood. Awesome. Well, thanks for that background, and I'm glad that you're in the field as well, and have always
Yeah.
appreciated the partnership. So you look at a lot of different companies, and you
Yep.
see where they are strong, where they're weak. And can you say a little bit about where they're most overconfident and potentially underprepared?
Yeah, this one can come up quite a bit. I think a lot of companies will over-index their readiness for AI governance or AI compliance initiatives with just kind of relying on the fact that they have a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001. And I understand it. There's certainly security implications when it comes to AI, but if you think about 42001, why it was created, sure, it follows the same structure as 27001, but it was really intended to cover all of the AI risks that 27001 doesn't. So think about everything non-security related, right? When we're talking about bias and fairness and responsible and ethical use and safety. I mean, a lot of the root cause of those issues, especially with bias and ethics, it's data issues, right? That we don't touch in 27001 or SOC 2. It really aren't the primary focus, I should say. So data quality, model training, data representation, not like I said, not the primary use or function of a 27001 or a SOC 2. Those can certainly inform, how you can build out an AI management system because, as 42001 is intended to integrate with existing management systems, and 42001 specifically refers to 27001, 27701, and 9001 for a lot of those elements that I just mentioned, that the quality aspects of data management. But again, very unique, and I think maybe the other area where companies may think they're ready is because they have an AI policy, but a lot of times, that AI policy may have been drafted by the compliance team in somewhat of a silo, and they're not fully working across the organization with all the relevant parties that would be impactful of forming out what is an AI strategy, right? So, I mean, that would be, operations, data science, engineering, legal, product, kind of it hits so many teams across an org. So the last thing you want to do is stand up a, straw man AI policy that was drafted in the silo, and it really wasn't, considering all the very many use cases and contexts of AI within an org.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to call out the structural similarity
Yep.
between ISO 42001, 27001, 27701. The subject matter, though, is quite different. And
Mm-hmm.
that, I think, can
Yes.
throw people for a loop sometimes. And it's important to note 42001 is not an AI security standard.
Yeah.
It is a AI management system standard
Correct.
that can include security, certainly as a
Correct.
subordinate concern. But yeah, the subject matter is can be new. And yeah, one related point on that is who do you see kind of running the AI management system from a blocking and tackling
Mm-hmm.
perspective? My what I've seen is that 80% of the time it is the security team that's doing it
Right.
just because they have those kind of muscles in
Mm-hmm.
place. But I've also seen quality teams in healthcare do
Yes.
it. What have you seen?
Yeah, I think you hit it. You're looking across a couple orgs who we may not have interfaced with, but primarily it's led or owned by security and a compliance function. But we are intersecting with some teams that we may not have for a quality or for a typical security audit. That being quality teams, that being product teams, data science, where we're really kind of getting into the technology itself, how it's run, how it's developed, legal, right? Of course, with 2026 being such a year for regulatory requirements coming online that are going to be very far reaching and impactful. They certainly have an interest in this, just like they did in 2018 when GDPR went live and people were kind of scrambling to determine what they're going to do to comply with GDPR. So it's, yeah, a lot very cross functional.
So you alluded to the regulatory landscape. I want to jump there and
Sure.
we can circle back on some of our other points. But 2026, you mentioned is kind of
Yeah.
a watershed year or a kind of a very noteworthy year when it comes to AI governance, risk, and compliance, specifically from a regulatory perspective. I can tell you two things on my radar and would love to hear your take on them. One is
Mm-hmm.
the Trump administration's executive order,
Yep.
basically saying that they're going to challenge some
I know.
state level AI
I know.
laws, calling out specifically from your home state, Colorado's SB
Yes.
205.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's funny because like the calls might be coming from inside the building with SB 205. There are a lot of people in Colorado also raising
Mm-hmm.
concerns publicly.
Right.
So that's one, and then two would be the European Union kind of started at the end of last year where there was. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like unfortunately Europe's losing a little credibility when it comes to
Yeah.
regulation because they were very aggressive saying there will be no delay, not one step back
Right.
type message, and then quickly at the end of the year started changing their tune. So would love to hear
Right.
your thoughts on those two things to the extent that you're willing to share. I could riff all day, but
Oh, of course.
I run my own company, so
Oh, no, no
I,
problem.
I take the consequences.
100%. And yeah, I know you and I have been trading notes on the things that
Yeah.
we've been doing out here in Colorado, and we've certainly had a little bit of drama surrounding the SB 24205, and then they were gonna push it back and then add some exclusions to it, and which they did end up pushing it back about was it 5 months?
Right.
It was supposed to be
Yeah.
February 1st of this year. Now it's gonna be June 30, but they dropped the. We're going to add some exclusions in terms of who this applies to, and then you had, of course, our governor came out just about the day he signed it when he was like, I had a lot of hesitations and reservations about signing that, which is, kind of brings a lot into question on, maybe it was the pressure to be first or, whatever we wanted to do, much like the EU AI Act. And they wanted to get it out there, show that they were, kind of leaders in the regulatory space. And then, when push comes to shove, we'll see. But no, it's going to be an interesting year. I mean, we've still got technically about 3-4 months until June 30. So we'll see. There's still some whispers that, who knows, are they going to add some exclusions to it, et cetera. But I think it's coming. I read something over the weekend about Florida potentially putting in something at the state level. I was just in January. I testified in New York. They're putting in a New York AI Act. So I mean, these things are
Is that the Raise Act
it's different than the Raise
or
Act. It would be actually
different?
much like SB 24205. I forget the actual
Okay.
bill name. But the reason I testified there was, which is not probably the norm for us, but we got introduced to the senator who's leading the committee, which is pushing this initiative, and they were very curious. They know the work that we do in the 42001 space, and they wanted us to get, or me specifically, to talk about, why 42001 could be potentially the way SB 24205 looks at it in Colorado as, could this be safe harbor? How is it designed? Is it, they were asking kind of practical questions. Is this like FedRAMP, like where it's going to cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain just for companies to enter the AI space, whatever it may be? How prohibitive is it? We talked about the value of, accreditation and independent auditing. So really it's just some basics, and then some of the foundational elements that, make 42001 kind of a viable option when you're thinking about regulatory readiness. I mean, the fact that it's also role-based, where if you look at the regulations, it's developers, deployers, and it's kind of geared towards that. It's geared towards putting a risk management program into place, doing a system impact assessment, because, for Colorado specifically, targeted at high risk providers. How do you know you're high risk if you haven't done a proper system impact assessment and kind of gone through that 360 evaluation of, kind of that outside in looking approach of your system? The importance of monitoring, the non-bias and discrimination. I mean, awareness, right? I mean, the EU AI Act's literacy requirements came online a year ago. Basically, if you're providing or developing AI, your team needs to be competent of the risks surrounding those areas, right? Accountability. We talked about GDPR a few times already, but it's another thing that's made this all very similar to GDPR. What was the role that we saw just come up in 2018, seemingly out of nowhere? Was this every org was hiring for DPOs? It's like, who's ultimately going to take accountability for data protection within an organization? It's like we're starting to see the same thing with AI. I'm seeing a lot of chief AI officers, chief ethics officers, these governance and accountability boards for AI getting formulated, which may or may not have some of the same folks from say a security steering committee, but including a lot of those same functions that we talked about earlier. So I think when you're looking at regulatory compliance, regardless of kind of a lot of the things that are happening at the state versus federal level, the EU AI Act is not going to go anywhere, and then more countries are going to be putting out things themselves, and so many folks are operating internationally these days that even if Trump administration were to put a kibosh on everything at the state level, which I don't think is going to necessarily happen anytime soon, maybe it will eventually, but who knows? You're still going to want to have due diligence in your company, and like that's the main idea, right? And that's what 42001 gets you. And I think kind of the main value behind it is it just establishes those operational disciplines of really kind of putting all those key pillars into place that I mentioned that are the key themes of regulations as well.
Yeah, I mean, if the Trump administration wants to preempt the state level AI laws, then I
Yeah,
think they should just propose a federal AI governance bill and
something
go through the
lightweight. Yeah.
process and
Hmm.
get it get a majority to pass it, and then have the president sign it. Then there's kind of there'll be no asterisks, there'll be no
Right.
ifs, ands, or buts.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, we're not headed in that direction. We're kind of going to a more fragmented approach,
Right.
which I think ties into the ISO 42000 side of things, because that requires an analysis of your external issues, specifically in the case of
Hmm.
regulations. So how can organizations use that standard to to wrap their heads around
Hmm.
the wave of regulation that they are going to be facing both at the US state level and
Yeah.
internationally?
Well, I mean, I think you just hit on it, right? I mean, it requires you to go through that analysis of internal, external issues, interested parties, right? I mean, so all those kind of surrounding influences, which would be the primary reason that you're implementing an ISMS in the first place. Some of that may be regulation, some of it may be competitors or the landscape that you operate within. But that's why, if one of the things that ISO has been criticized for is that it's too broad. But I mean, that's why I think there's the benefit in the broadness because it allows organizations, whether they're just using AI internally or they are providing products and services that utilize AI or they're developing products and services, it applies to all of them. So you would essentially have that leeway within the standard to say, okay, we operate within the EU, so the EU AI Act is important to us, or we operate in Colorado, or we're headquartered in New York, and whatever it may be. So everyone's AI management system should look a little bit different in that respect. But like I said, the main underpins and themes of what is an AI management system, the fact that you need to define your role, because that's where I know, you're not going to be ready for 42,001 is when we don't know kind of the basics of, what would drive the scope of 42,001. If we don't know our role, how do how can we approach regulatory compliance? Or we have companies asking us to define their role for them, again, muddy waters and areas that we don't want to get in. So we need to know that first, right? Because if you are driven by compliance with regulations, but you don't know how you fit into that regulation, I mean, those are foundational elements. I don't need to look at anything else in your AI management system at that point because your role is going to drive the applicability and the extent of the applicability of how we view the controls and underlying activities. So super foundational elements. And like I said, the areas that are, if you think about what's different with 27,001, that impact assessment, super critical. So many of these regulations are based on your risk level. Like I said, Colorado's applying to high risk systems. EU, it's got the tier, you're anywhere from unacceptable to, I think, maybe negligible is the bottom. But how do you know where you fit in between that if you haven't gone through and done the system impact assessment? And you see that terminology is very prevalent through a lot of the regulations and awareness of your teams and who's ultimately taking accountability for AI within your organization. It's funny, our CRO was at a conference the other day, and somebody had asked the question, how many people know who owns AI within their organization? I think it was like 10% of the hands went up. So it's just like things like that are still, very found. Everyone wants to use AI, but, to use it properly, to put in the right safeguards. I mean, that's what this stuff is all about. And I think a lot of companies are still quite behind, maybe not their use of AI, but, really thinking through the risks, downstream implications, that type of thing.
Something that I get asked from clients and potential clients a lot is about, what do I have to do, or what can't I do if I have ISO 42001 certification? And the answer is there's nothing really that
Yeah.
says what you can and
Yeah.
cannot do. A key requirement is that you establish a risk criteria that
Correct.
says what's an unacceptable risk and what
Mhm.
is acceptable. That's on the organization, like you were alluding to, and that can come into play with regulatory requirements. For example,
Yeah.
under the EU AI Act, you're not allowed to use emotion inference in the workplace or education. But in the
Mhm.
United States, in some jurisdictions, that could be perfectly fine. It happens all the time. So, that would form part of your risk criteria
Yeah.
for your use of AI. And that's something that the organization needs to figure out, not the auditor. And you don't want the
Mhm.
regulator figuring that out for you and pointing out where you got it wrong, because then you're going to have an enforcement action.
100%.
Yeah. So in terms of, coming back to the audit side of things, because this is
Yeah.
really where I'm interested, what are the kind of top two or three things that you're looking for to determine if an AI management system is fake, essentially,
Yeah.
versus whether it's real? And when I say fake, like,
Sure.
I know organizations that they
Yeah.
have like kind of policies that they show to
Right.
auditors, and then they kind of have the
Uh-huh.
internal way of doing business. What are you looking for?
Yeah, and I like this question. It's because it's a very real question. I mean, you can span that across compliance programs in general. These kind of check the box type activities that obviously is not the intent of anything that we're doing at Schellman. But I think when you look at 42,001. I mean, it was published when the end of 2023. It was out there. Companies like, weren't really getting certified unless they were really in front of the market like you all in 2024. So it was probably 2025 when um, this really became a measuring stick, right? Before that, you could have the AI policy and that was sufficient. You could have the, um, you know, AI trust page on your website, and that was sufficient. But now, what's nice about 42,001, it's like, okay, you're saying you all are using AI responsibly. Here's the benchmark, right? And we've started to see it ourselves looking at the market. I mean, we certified a really big company, and they do HCM and financial management. And right after that, like probably within a week of their press release coming out, their biggest competitor reached out to us and was like, "Hey, our ELT saw that press release. We need this now. When can you guys start?" So this is how it spreads, right? I mean, it was a lot of the enterprises, like I said, first movers in 2024. Then I think a lot of the other type of companies, whether they were in their supply chain or kind of their competitors, started doing this in 2025, all as a part of to get ahead. And then, this year is really, okay, we have to do this. We've had companies reach out to us and be like, hey, we need this by August when these high risk regulations come online, because, we're getting a lot of pressure from legal or management or whatever it may be. So that all said, to answer your question, I mean, I think, you know, how do I know what are some warning signs? What are real controls versus fake? I mean, we're certainly not, the gotcha auditors and what we're trying to do, but we understand the importance of what, good AI governance looks like. And maybe it sounds a little cheesy, but I always say like good AI governance should leave some fingerprints within your organization, right? You should be able to tell me, hey, what are some decisions that got influenced by the fact that you had, AI governance or AI leadership in the room challenging certain decisions? What are some features of your products that may have gotten disabled or modified as a result of knowing the thresholds that you need to operate in, or knowing the geographies and territories that you operate within? So then, as I talked about before, understanding the basics, like if you don't understand your role, like don't show me anything else. Like we need to know that you've thought through this, that you understand, if you don't know if you're a developer or a provider or whatever it may be, those are foundational issues, right? This is not just something that you could walk into. You really need to put a lot of thought into this and going through those proper protocols. And probably really where the rubber hits the ground is the organizations that really get it nail the system impact assessment. I mean, it's kind of, sound like a nerd, but I guess I'm an ISO auditor, so it's like, it all kind of fits in. But like, in my opinion, the system impact assessment is the most critical component of a management system. Why? Because it actually shows that an organization has taken the time and has gone through the discipline of doing a 360-degree view of the impact of their system. Like I said, I alluded to before, but it's really more, maybe traditional risk assessments are kind of inside out. It's really the outside in view with respect to impacts and risks for your system. So you're looking at anything from intended, unintended uses, benefits and harms, misuse impacts, like key dependencies. What about key elements of data, right? I mean, as an AI system is so heavily dependent on the data within the system. Who are the owners? What are the sources? Things you talk about with provenance, collection techniques, access rights, uh, data quality, thresholds, and criteria around that. I mean, model and algorithm information. So it's how you train, test, evaluate, what triggers a reevaluation. So it's like none of these are really security elements. So when you hand me your security risk assessment, I mean, it's I know off the bat that it's not going to have looked into a lot of these things. So and the last is really just tone at the top. And like I said, that sits on top of all of this, and it becomes very clear when it's a compliance manager signing off on certain things, as opposed to, hey, this is getting reviewed by our CISO or our chief AI officer every quarter, whatever it may be, as opposed to being done in a silo. So
Understood. Yeah. Yeah, something that I encourage everyone who's listening, and I encourage my clients to do, is like when they're doing those risk and impact assessments to be specific, because
Yeah.
you could probably skate by with a risk like hallucination, to which I would say, yes, I agree.
Hmm.
Inaccurate output
But
is a
yeah.
risk of using
Hmm.
AI. Yes, that's a risk. But like, let's let's get specific here. Like, what are we actually
Yeah.
talking about? Something that we just started integrating at StackAware in our product is, we're pulling down the Vectara hallucination leaderboard
Mm.
every time it's updated. So like the rates of hallucination based on third party analysis of all these different models, that's something that gets ingested, that's pulled into our risk register, and we're saying like, hey, we're assuming this number of
Yeah.
interactions, we're assuming this error rate, and that will lead to this number of faulty outputs.
Right.
So yeah, like being specific, I think, is really important. And if you have an AI
Hmm.
impact assessment that says, yeah, we may,
Yeah.
we may impact some people,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not exactly
And you
not
can
exactly
tell.
doing a lot of
Yeah.
work. Yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
can tell. That's just a paperwork exercise, and as opposed to really like, and then like I said, how does that impact the downstream decisions that you make? Because yeah, sure, you can give me something very surface level, and you and I both know it's like, okay, if you're spending the time, money, et cetera, and doing this the right way for the right reasons, I mean, the companies that take this seriously. So
Yeah, and I mean, like if you're doing it as intended, it actually becomes a useful
correct.
tool.
Hmm.
It becomes something that you can use. If you're just doing the checkbox thing, basically you got to do all your other work plus this checkbox for kind of
Hmm.
no reason. So it's actually more work, I think, to do it
I
the
agree.
checkbox way.
I agree.
Cool. So moving on, we hit a kind of some of the big things here. Oh yeah, this is something I'd love to hear about. Hear your take on
Yeah.
these two things. So, one is ISO 42001 and all the ISO management system standards require continual
Yeah.
improvement to the management system. I'd love to see how you've seen
Yeah.
this done effectively, and what are some things that were like, wow, this is really amazing. Like this is an incredible improvement.
Yeah, I think continual improvements. It's one of those things. It sounds great in the standard, but like if there's no intentionality behind it from a company, it means nothing, right? So, what does it look like when it's done well? I mean, companies that get this right, I mean, they do treat their AI management system like a living system, not a compliance artifact, right? Um, they're not blowing it off, taking it off the shelf and blowing the dust off once a year, right? I mean, they're actively feeding it with new information. That could be incident reports, that could be model performance data, that could be regulatory updates, internal audit findings. It all flows back into the system, right? It's a management system and triggers real action. I mean, that's why I've always been super passionate about ISO audits versus maybe some other controls based frameworks, because it really is intended to be this all encompassing system, right? So the most effective implementations and patterns typically have a few ingredients. I mean, there's a formal feedback loop, right? Having defined processes for how they gather feedback, how they capture lessons learned. So that could be AI incidents, near misses, successful deployments, unsuccessful deployments, routing that back into their risk assessment and controls. It sounds basic. I mean, most companies don't have it though. Metrics tied to improvement targets, right? So if you have continual improvement, but no real ways of measuring that, I mean, there's nothing really there for that's tangible to know if we're trending in the right direction or not. So setting a baseline of metrics to start the year. That could be bias rates, that could be incident response times, oversight coverage, and holding themselves to accountable to if those values move and change. And then finally, I kind of mentioned it before, but executive sponsorship, that's genuine. I mean, that's the key. That's actually genuine, right? There's real. That's what kind of separates the box checkers from the real companies here. Having whether it's whoever you've designated as kind of top management, as ISO calls it, whether that's your CISO, chief AI officer, they need to be involved, because that's where it becomes really more of a cultural impact management system than just, like I said, just policies on paper. So I'd say those areas are key for companies to hone in on. And that's not rocket science. I mean, that's just understanding what the intent is of an ISO management system, and then creating formal systems or processes for which to make that engine work. Right.
Yeah, I'll say something for me that continual improvement has taken the form of is automation, and I
Yeah.
found, I mean, maybe I over index or I try to over
Yeah.
optimize on automation, but I mainly use automation just so I don't need to remember things, because
Oh
like
yeah.
doing it
Yeah.
manually sometimes, that can work, and I do have a lot of Jira tickets that are just like reminders to do things,
Sure.
and then I can document that it's done. But automation, if you can automate stuff, then that really removes a lot of the kind of the toil out of the compliance toil. It lets you focus on kind of the higher level decisions, determining if you're targeting the right metrics, if you're hitting
Hmm.
your targets when it comes to objectives or continual improvement. So that's something that I found useful, to kind of wrap that in the
Hmm.
continual improvement vehicle, I guess, is
Yeah.
putting a lot of automation in. So,
Hmm.
yeah. Related note on metrics and measurements, you
Yeah.
alluded to, bias. I mean, I have a lot
Yeah.
to say about that term, but what are some good metrics you've seen
Yeah.
companies use in their ISO 42001 management systems to drive to or to show that they're targeting certain objectives and achieving them?
Yeah. I think, again, going back to basics. So think about risk and governance. I mean, how many AI systems are in your inventory? What percentage of those systems have gone through a formal risk assessment? I mean, if you can't answer that, again, it's like going back to the role. You don't have a good grasp on visibility of your own AI footprint. So, foundational issue. You can talk about model performance and drift, right? Are your models still performing the way that they were validated to perform? So what are you looking at? What does that mean? You could look at, accuracy degradation. You could look at false positives, uh, distributional drift metrics that can be, each reviewed on their own defined cadence, not just at deployment. I mean, that's kind of the key, the ongoing monitoring, right? Because a lot of things look good in the beginning and then slowly drift over time. You can look at incidents, right? How many AI incidents did you have? Not just that, but like correlating it to were they quickly detected and resolved. Um, a lot of a lot of folks will say, hey, no incidents, no near misses, and it's like, okay, wait, is this true? Is this a data collection problem at that point? Not an
None
actual
that you know
safety
about.
success. Yeah, so I think over indexing on that, like, oh, we're secure, nothing to report. It's nothing. Okay, doesn't that make you a little concerned that you're not missing something? So. And the last one's probably human oversight. I mean, we got into this a little bit on the webinar last week when we were talking about, AI and change management, and where does human in the loop, belong, and does that devalue the impact of an autonomous process or control? But yeah, I mean, what impact of, and this all goes back to risk, right? As you know, the AI management system primarily revolves around your risk assessment. So, what percentage of high risk AI decisions were reviewed by a human? Um, what's the override rate there? And if nobody's ever overriding the model, it goes back to the if we had no incidents. I mean, either the models, which is probably not the case, or your culture of oversight is broken. And again, that goes back to the we're not having any incidents. We're good. It's this thing's on autopilot, and we're all set. So I kind of look at it as what are the metrics like we have a really great CFO, and she has these metrics, and she reviews them with rigor, regularity, and we're always kind of board level ready for reporting these things. And like with AI, it should be the same. And we get that question all the time from clients, and that's again another what you could call a measuring stick for if I know if you're ready for an audit or not. When they're like, hey, what should we measure on a periodic basis? And I'm like, well, it's not up to us to tell you that, but these are some things you can think through. But ultimately, you're the one who's very intimate with the technology and things that you need to know about. So
Absolutely. So, looking ahead, what do you
yeah,
see as the future of AI auditing and assurance? Where is this going to
yeah.
go? Is AI going to be doing some of this work?
Yeah.
What do you see the future as being?
Oh, tough question to answer, but I mean, yeah, I think the way we audit today is probably going to look like the way we used to audit on pen and pad and using paper checklists and whatnot, like 5, 10 years ago. So, well, 10 years ago probably, but we're going to evolve from going from what is these annual checkpoints to something that's more real time. Um, it's not like these AI systems freeze, from one year to the next when we do the next audit. So it's like we've got to find ways, and whether that's us as third party auditors or at least from an insights perspective. Obviously, we may not be doing the audit every day of the year, but how do our clients and how do organizations get a better hold of their systems, not on a quarterly, semi-annual, annual basis, but really thinking about this more real time. I mean, that's part of why we got really attracted to this AIUC1 standard. It's just a different way of auditing, right? It's the standards updated quarterly. It's technically focused. Their clients are getting evaluated on a quarterly basis against what are the latest and greatest of the threat taxonomies that are out there, and how does the standard morphed to that. So it kind of keeps organizations honest there. So and yeah, I just think with AI governance in general, it's no longer this optional thing we talked about. I mean, the market is, I think, finally come around to thanks to folks like you and people who are putting out a lot of content and awareness around this. Is yeah, I mean, it's going to be the same expectation of SOC 2 and 27001. If like you don't have this, it's going to be a revenue blocker. It's going to prevent deals from getting closed. Not just I think, should we do this? Should we not? Nobody's asking me about this. And kind of the conversations we've had over the last couple of years, to where this is going to be a baseline expectation for trust. And that's why I've got a lot of pride in what we do at Schellman, just because I know, look, AI it's everywhere. It's going to be more and more. I hope it doesn't turn into Terminator 2, but we play a really important role from a independent audit perspective, and just assuring that our clients are putting the right safeguards in place and guardrails, and we're doing what we can to be responsible about all of this. And yeah, I mean, we'll see where it goes, but ask me that question again in 5 years, I'll probably have a totally different answer. It might not even be me. It might be Danny's agent or something along those lines. But it's exciting. I mean, look, from 2023 to now, how much has it changed, right? I mean, and that's just not even 3 years that 42,001's been out. So yeah, it's all very, very interesting.
So, if an AI agent is answering my question in 5 years, will you be running an ultra marathon during that time?
That'd be great. I was talking at a panel the other day, and I brought this up, and I was like, how cool would it be if during an ultra, I had some type of AI that was telling me exactly where I was on hydration, electrolytes, where my glucose was, body temperature, how I needed to cool myself. Oh, yeah, it's a little bit of a guessing game as you're going through, and like, how can I introduce AI to make me, that much more. I'm not very good at ultras, but like, yeah, how can I get better? But yeah, we'll see. I think AI and athletic performance, and we've talked about, kind of the wearables and stuff like that, which I think there's a ton of benefits there. A lot of scary factors with respect to privacy and information disclosure. But I mean, the insights that we have today on health and nutrition and whatnot. Super cool, and something that I'm very passionate about.
So, you said you're not very good at ultra marathoning. I just want to let our
I don't know.
audience know that I
Yeah,
consider surviving an ultra
yeah.
marathon automatically making you good at them. Can you say a little bit more about your hobby or your
Oh
career in ultra
gosh,
marathoning?
how much time do we have? But it was Walter. If you knew me before 2020, not a lot of people did, because I didn't post on LinkedIn. I wasn't very like doing this podcast. No way. Like, I was
Yeah.
terrified of public speaking and had a lot of anxiety around that. But Yeah, I mean, long story short is I was not an ultra marathoner before 2020. This was one of those, I did a 180-degree pivot, which most people probably changed most of their habits for the worst in COVID. I just started popping off a bunch of ultras. But yeah, so I mean, long story short, I had gotten fairly unhealthy, right? In 10 years at that point of cumulative, call it consulting experience, work experience with travel. Hey, I mean, insert every excuse that everybody has in this industry: travel, client dinners, eating out, kind of slowly letting go of the rope from a discipline perspective. Um, all that was really exacerbated. And I posted a lot about this last year when I was training for Badwater because we did it for we were raising money for a charity for infertility. But 2014 to 2018, there's a 5-year span where my wife and I had gone through several years of infertility treatments and went through IVF 5 times. And if you're familiar with that, it's like buying a Toyota Camry every time you have to do it. So it's really stressful. They're usually not covered by insurance, and I kind of just felt like I was just in this like never-ending stress loop of, the work is stressful, right? I mean, we're not going to hide from that. I mean, we're clients and deadlines and a lot of, kind of things that we need to keep up with. And then, outside of work, we're this 5-year span of going through IVF, waiting a couple months. Oh, it didn't work. Go, writing another check, going, it didn't work. And then it's just, man, and it just had this huge, it was the lowest point of my, kind of probably life, really, just from like a woe is me negative attitude. I got dealt this bad hand. Everybody, and it's that age when, in your late 20s, early 30s, like all your family and friends are having kids and starting families, and you're like, I'm withdrawing money from my 401k at this point to, go through these infertility treatments, and nothing's working, and I don't know what we're gonna do. Eventually, we were blessed. End of 2018, we had twins, boy and a girl, which it's funny because a lot of people ask, do twins run in your family? And then I'm like, all right, how much time do you have? Because I'm about to tell you this story that I'm telling you right now. So no, they don't. It was intentional. They were IVF. We hand selected them, all that. But how did it all change? I mean, so it's 2020. I'm 32 years old. People can calculate, I guess, how old I am right now. But I've got 1-year-old twins. I've got high blood pressure, high cholesterol, autoimmune disease that's all been, kind of exacerbated through all these years of stress and just not taking care of myself. And we've talked about this. It was 2020. So, we kind of had this hard break of travel, just all that stuff like it did for everybody. And I'm like, man, I gotta be better. I'm not a role model for my kids right now. It's just kind of not only physically, but, I'm a big believer in your body. Kind of, it helps with your mind. And, if your body's not right, you're not going to be as mentally sharp or positive as you possibly can be, bringing your best self. So I picked up David Goggins' book, and he gets kind of a tough rap because I think a lot of the language that he uses and whatnot. But ultimately, his lesson is that we can all be better, and we are all responsible for that change. Like, I can't come to you and Walter, I want to be better, and you're like, oh, Danny, just do these 10 things, and it's like I ultimately have to do them. Right. So, it's kind of that accountability mirror, he calls it. And I just said, look, I'm not where I need to be, and I'm going to make the change. So started running. And Walter, let me tell you, getting good at running, I know you've been in the military and everything. You've probably done a lot of physical training as well. Like, getting good at running is terrible. I mean, I've had every injury head to toe over the years. And it's this big trial and error thing, but, ultimately kind of stuck with it or whatever. And, 2020, the second half, this is March 2020. I couldn't run 1 mile outside without stopping. I ended up running 6 marathons the second half of 2020. I was going to do like a marathon in every state. And then in 2021, I got into ultras, and I'm training for a race in the North Dakota Badlands. It was actually a marathon that I signed up for, but they had a 50 mile, a 75 mile, and a 100 mile. And I was like, what if? And I was just training, and I'm like, well, I'm doing all this running these days. And I was like, I didn't really start talking about it at that point either. And I was like, what if I can do something good here? Like, what if we gamify this? Because you don't want to just do a fundraiser and I didn't want to do, hey, I'm running the Boston Marathon, like help raise funds. It's like, okay, that's kind of cool. But I was like, what if I did something totally outrageous? People who, if you talked to me a year ago, you'd be like, you can't even run a mile. What are you talking about running 100 miles? So So it got people's attention. They're like, "What is Danny up to?" I'm like, "Okay, if we raise $5,000, I'll jump in the because I'm in the marathon and I keep emailing the race director. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna jump into the 50, jump into the 75. I'm like, who is this guy? But we raised $5,000, so I switched my registration to the 50, and then or I'm like, all right, if we raise $7,500, I'll do the 75 mile. $10,000 or more, I'm running the 100 mile. So you probably know where this story is going. We raised $15,000, which is awesome. So for this charity, Resolve, they're the infertility charity, because like my number one thing is like I never want anybody to go through what my wife and I did. It was a horrible, horrible time. I mean, physically, I should say, psychologically, financially, just the stress that it brings. So let me talk about this. There's a huge stigma around infertility. Nobody really wants to talk about it. And like the amount of people who reached out to me and everything during those years, made it all worth it, which is super cool. But yeah, long story short, I'm on the hook for running this 100-mile race. It's actually 107. By the time you get there, the race director's like, "Oh yeah, we took the measurements. It's 107." I'm like, that's a big difference, man. Like
7 miles is like a serious race by itself.
Exactly. Of course, I take a wrong turn. I end up running 108, but like, um, it was so cool. So I mean, if you've ever, I don't know if you ever, but have you been to the Badlands in North Dakota?
No.
Okay, there's a place called Teddy Roosevelt National Forest, and he used to spend a lot of time up there. In fact, he went like on a. I was listening to a podcast the other day. I think he went on like a long retreat there after I think maybe his wife had passed, and so he spent a lot of time in the Badlands. And there's this whole area that's dedicated to him up in North Dakota. So it's a point-to-point race, and I end up finishing the race, and Badlands are tough. I mean, they call it the Badlands because it's totally exposed. There's no trees or shade or any of that. And of course, the race is on like July 31st, hottest part of the year. And but I'm kind of finishing this race, and my son and daughter and my wife are there. My son's just kind of hanging out at the finish line. I'll never forget this. It was just like I'm not a very emotional guy, but like every time I tell this story, I kind of get a little emotional. It's like he's sitting there, and like I'm coming towards him, and he's just kind of waiting for me, and I've kind of got my hands out, like waiting to get a big hug from him. And it's like I just have so many emotions at that point. I'm like, man, I'm stepping out of my old life of this. A year ago, you were this woe is me guy who had 40 pounds of fat on him, basically, and now you're running 107 miles through 108 miles, I guess, through the harshest terrain in the U.S. And I didn't think I'd ever have a family, and here I am, running into my son's arms, waiting for me. And since then, they've crossed the finish line with me at Leadville 100 twice. My daughter, before 7, she's run 3 5Ks, and before 8, she wants to run a 10K, and she's doing a triathlon this summer. So it's been pretty cool, man. And it's like, my underlying message is not about, hey, look at me and all I can run. It's like, hey, if I started at this place I started, which is I really don't have a lot of athletic skill and talent and all that. It's just grit and drive, and if you want to make a change, you can make changes. So you have to be very intentional about it. And kind of the application to business is like I said, I would have never stood. I tried public speaking like once or twice before all this. Like I would sweat like a leaf, shaking. Now I love it because it's just like another challenge, right? And it's like, all this has helped me build my self-confidence. And I'm a big believer in like, you can't lead others. Like I'm in a position of leadership at the firm, and one of our managing principals, like I'm a big believer in you can't lead others without really leading yourself, and bringing that positive energy. And I don't know if you know Jesse Itzler. He's owner of the NBA Hawks. He had a coconut water company, Zico, that he sold to Coca-Cola. He's done a couple other big things. He started NetJets. Anyways, he's got this thing called Misogi, and it's basically once a year putting a year-defining event on the schedule. So that's what I do ever since I remember. So I did that race in the Badlands in 2021. I remember I told my wife I wanted to do like several months later. She thought it was just the one thing we're going to do, like raising money. I was like, I think I want to do another one. She's like, I will curse on your podcast, but she's like, are you effing crazy? Like, no way. So I've started to do 1 or 2 of these a year. It just keeps me honest. And it's just like one of these things that puts a lot of things into perspective, keeps me challenged. And, again, it's, if I'm having a tough day or something, I'm like, well, at least, it's not mile 80 of Badwater, and it's not 130 degrees out here, and I just passed out because I'm so tired and hot. But I got 55 miles to go uphill. Whatever. It's a client's upset about something. So, and for my team, I know we're running up on time, but for my team too, like I want them to know that you can ascend to the highest levels of leadership. Because I always thought, oh, I don't want to be a partner at a CPA firm. Like they don't have any lives or hobbies, or they look 10 years older than they really are. And I'm like, well, what if I can redefine that? So super long answer to your question, but I mean that's kind of why I love it. I'm about to go out to Italy and do a 200K in a couple months. It's my first time doing something international, so
Woo.
it's once a year, once or twice a year. Keep myself honest.
Well, that's awesome. I think I can crown you the family-friendly David Goggins. Where
Yeah,
same message,
yeah,
just no
yeah.
profanity or yelling. But I think you channel that message very effectively. So thank you for sharing that
Oh,
story.
of course, of course.
Is there a fundraising page or anything for that you want to share? Or
Yeah,
I can put in the show
we did
notes if you
it.
want.
It ended last summer, so we did one in 2021. We did one last summer for Badwater, which
Okay.
was the 135-mile race across Death Valley. So no active fundraisers, but appreciate you
Okay.
asking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that was an excellent end to our conversation. And Danny, really appreciate you coming on the show. I think we learned a lot about AI assurance, about ISO
yeah,
42001, about ultra marathoning, about grit, determination, triumphing over adversity. So thank you very much for sharing that.
100%.
And yeah, to our audience, thanks again. This has been the Deploy Securely podcast, and we will see you next time.
Appreciate the opportunity, Walter.